Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for the Admissions Director panel. Frankly, I'm surprised that you bothered to stay for this panel. I mean, getting into business school, it's pretty straightforward, right? So why would you want to hear from admissions directors from 4 of the world's top business schools? But I think we need to establish some ground rules, a little bit like this is the Admissions Director panel in Vegas, and what is said here stays here, because if these 4 panelists then all hear these pearls of wisdom and they appear in the essays that they receive 6 months from now, I think they're going to work it out. One example is that Rich Lyons, the dean at Haas, admitted that if he had been asked for a request with the guitar, he would have sung Mac the Knife. Now, Haas actually asks you in their application to choose a song and what you love about that song. So I think you can work that one out.
A little too.
But we talk about a pride of lions, we talk about a parliament of owls, and if there was a collective noun for admissions directors, well, maybe somebody can come up with a suggestion for such a glamorous panel that we have for you this morning. Virginie Fougère suffers from me describing her as the Grace Kelly of admissions for the last 20 years. Virginie is the director of MBA recruitment and admissions at Insead. Sitting next to her, Tina Mabley, who is the assistant dean at UT Austin McCombs. She's actually also Ariana Grande in her spare time. You put a microphone on this woman, we'll see what happens next. Kirsten Moss, who was formerly an admissions director at the Harvard Business School, but has crossed the coast. And Kirsten begins her new position on July the 1st.
June the 1st.
June the 1st. Oh, so this is official.
2 weeks in.
This is official. A couple weeks in. Is the Assistant Dean and Director of Admissions at Stanford at GSB. And one of the most snappily dressed admissions directors, Kurt who is the Associate Dean of Admissions at Chicago Booth. When he was with us in the panel in London, we had about 25 tweets commenting on the snazzy socks that he'd chosen to wear for this event.
I failed miserably today.
But they're clean socks today.
Yeah,
so.
well, I have been traveling.
This week was the Gmat conference held here in San Francisco. And if you look at some of the applicant trends that Gmat captures with their audience, we see this flight to quality. We see a growing demand for the 1-year MBA program. And among the 2-year MBA programs, the world's top business schools have tremendous demand. In fact, the last time that Harvard Business School had over 10,000 applications for the 940 places in Boston was just after the tech bubble burst. I don't know what their announcement last week promises for San Francisco and the Bay Area in the weeks and the months to follow. And I'd like to just start there in terms of admissions trends. Perhaps, Virginie, we can start with you. We look at Brexit, we look at Trump and H-1B visas, but Insead has a great story to share anyway. So what have you been seeing in terms of application volume?
Well, to be very honest, the last 2 years have been interesting to watch because we have seen rounds where we typically receive less applications, like the round 3 or the round 4, seeing increases for those rounds. So we have seen different behaviors in the applicant pool. Definitely increases. Increases primarily driven from the US and also from South America. Eastern Europe is unfortunately not doing so well. So we received last applications from Eastern Europe and a big increase from Southeast Asia. So it tells you, indeed, as you said earlier, it all depends also on how the economy is doing and how well the economy is doing. So certainly, we haven't seen yet the effect of some of the uncertainties in Europe, and here we could be seeing in the near future some of these effects. Yeah.
Austin is one of the hip places to live, but it's also a popular place to go to business school.
Yes, Austin's been really helped us in the last 5 years. I started recruiting 15 years ago and would have to talk about Austin more than we have to today, being the fastest growing city for about 4 years in the country. There's been a lot of movement to Austin. Our applications have been up for the last 3 years. This year was sort of up a little close to flat. So Some of that is international. We've talked a lot as a group of admission directors and schools about the impact on international admissions for our various countries. I don't know that we will see it this year, but it's something that all of us are watching in the years to come to see what the different flows are for applications.
Now, Kirsten, obviously conscious that you've been in the position just a couple of weeks, so perhaps not able to look at sort of past data, but you're going to be pretty busy from round one onwards, right?
For sure, that's right. And I'd say it's similar to what Tina just mentioned. So applications are still up, but as I talked to, even in my 3 weeks, the last 3 weeks, especially from international applicants, just concerns about getting the visas and what it's going to be looking like in the next 2 years. So we're sensitive that we want to admit anyone who is able to come, and we're going to continue to look strongly across the globe for the best applicants, but they have concerns.
Yeah.
Booth, that was up 12% last year. Are you seeing a Trump effect?
Not so far. I mean, we were up both domestically and internationally. We had some concerns, I think, in terms of the visa process, but actually those have been going through pretty rapidly. Our class is securing visas, so we haven't really seen any impact from the application standpoint. I think we'll see, with H-1Bs and all that stuff, as that becomes more solidified, what happens on the back end. But right now, everything's been moving pretty smoothly.
So as candidates have worked hard to think about, where business school fits into their personal, professional development, they click submit, and the applications end up in your office. If we can sort of look behind the curtain and maybe just get a glimpse into a day in the life of the admissions office. Now, Tina, in your mid-20s, but you've been in this industry for over 15 years.
Thank you.
Can you talk us through a typical admissions round and how the team works to
Sure.
put together the diversity?
The application comes in. We have a series of buttons. We hit one, and the decision is made in a matter of seconds.
Take the picture. Take the picture first.
And then we go on vacation for about 2 months and tell you when we come back. That's what everybody believes, right? So applications come in. We operate in rounds at the University of Texas, and our applications come in. We deal with every round independently so that we can build our class as our applications come in. So we will fill our class as we have, as our applications come in. So we always say the earliest you are ready to apply, the better, because sometimes we will fill the class in the first 2 rounds. So the applications come in. It's about a 2-month process from the time the application deadline is until the notification timeline. Each round is a little bit different, but that's generally the time frame, which gives our admissions team a lot of time to do a lot of reading. So what we do is we send them on the road traveling, and just when they're sick of traveling, we say, okay, now you're sequestered in reading mode for the next couple of months. So that's about the timeline for our process.
Now, at Insead, of course, you have 2 class entries and 4 rounds for each. So before you joined Tina in Cancun on that spring break, how does it work, including perhaps admissions committee, where Insead includes faculty, right, in some of that discussion?
Yes, so we rely heavily on the alumni and faculty. They are members of the admissions committee. The difference is that we also have a few places for round 3 and round 4, so we don't have the early birds. So any round you have similar chances. We use a wait list to kind of know since we might not know what to expect for the following round. So we use the wait list. And the very important person in the admissions officer is your admissions officer. So once you submit an application, you have the name of a person who can answer your calls. Obviously they are based in France, so you have to bear in mind the time difference, but you have a person you can call and say, hey, are you sure you have everything for me? When are the interviews going to be released? And the interviews happen wherever you are based. You do not need to travel to Fontainebleau or Singapore, and they are conducted by alumni. So that's
right. Kurt, anything that you would add to that in terms of what you're looking for in that entire process?
No, I would say that it's fairly similar. The one thing that came up actually when I was in London, a common question that came up was about, does it help to apply before the deadline itself? So a lot of people were sort of concerned that they had to get their applications in quickly because in some ways that we would start reviewing early. I don't know if that varies school to school, but for us, it's totally deadline driven. So we don't actually start the process until basically the day after the deadline. So I think for a lot of people, just having the opportunity to kind of take some time, really make sure that you have all your ducks in a row and feel like you've officially kind of gotten your questions answered, you feel good about where the application is at. I would just say it's good that you have the time, at least for Booth. But the rest of the process is fairly standard. We have 3 rounds. We have a committee-based process, invite to interview type of process. So it's not terribly different. I do have one of those spinner boards though. It's admit waitlist. Sometimes referred to. So it's not terribly scientific. So, but yeah, it's very much holistic, and we really take into account fit and really understanding the institution. But we'll probably get into that a little bit later.
Well, I mean, just staying with rounds, it's one thing to apply 24 hours before a deadline, but the choice of round 1 versus round 2 and round 3.
Yeah.
I think a lot of candidates sort of think, do I improve my chances by applying in one of the earlier rounds? Mm-hmm. Talk us through your perspectives from Booth.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that my default is, you should apply when you feel like your application is absolutely at its best. We do admit as we go along, so traditionally round 3 can become more challenging. I think if, the competition, if you look at sort of the admit rates between rounds 1 and 2, it's not significantly different. But I think if you're trying to kind of rush something in, by cheating yourself in the time, you probably do more damage than you do by waiting for the next round to put in your best possible effort. So I know for a lot of people, the Gmat can be something that they're trying to kind of weigh. The recommendations, I think sometimes getting the proper time to really think through your essays. Again, for us, we try to put an application together that really assesses a sense of fit with the institution. So I think the more you're able to kind of do your due diligence and think through things, the stronger your application is going to be. And I think that outweighs the timing more so than just trying to get it in for a certain round.
Kirsten, we had a discussion in London of applicants that look at the typical class profile and almost sort of lock...
Can I go back to the last question?
Please,
Is that
you
all right?
answer.
Unless you guys, do you want to hear how we think about it too? And the intent for saying that before we go to the next question is really, I'm 3 weeks into my job, just barely. So with some vulnerability, I thought, do I really want to get on stage with a bunch of applicants and talk about this? The good news is that I worked at Stanford for many years before becoming director. I took some time off and came back to the institution. But the reason that I'm here today and why this is important for me to sit with you in my 3rd week is it's all about having you put your best foot forward. So in each of our processes, and I'm sure I can speak for the other schools, trying to take each application, because that's my job. That's the value that I tell my staff. You put a lot of time into this. We want to give a thoughtful decision. So even though the structure is very similar to what some of the other schools have said in terms of 3 rounds, I think it's relevant to let you guys know the people who are reading your applications for us, they are staff. Many of them have their MBAs. Many of them came from Stanford. If I can count the number who've had over a decade of experience or more. And anyone who's new who will be looking at your application doesn't just get trained for a day. They get trained for weeks to do it. For us, we're lucky to be able to really be in a selective place and really want to do the best that we can to find high potential leaders out there. So we want to make sure that our readers know the difference. Let's say if you're in banking, what is the difference between sales and trading and corporate finance? Or if you're in private equity, if you're at a firm that's doing LBOs versus high growth or some mixture, because the context of how we look at what you've done and how you've done that matters. So at least, and I can't speak for everybody, but in submitting your application, I do get that question like, do you even really know what I'm doing? And yes, we do know that context. So please speak to specific details about what your accomplishments are. And know, at least for us, that folks will have spent many years looking at people from your industry and can understand it and want to understand what the nuances of what you've accomplished in that space.
Now, we have an audience that's meeting you in mid-June and perhaps can meet some of those earlier deadlines. A predecessor at Stanford 15 years ago in a coffee shop in Paris admitted that in round 3, Sharon saw 2,000 applications and there are only 3 places left. Mm-hmm. And Sharon's quite good at Scrabble, and the word that she used was sort of catastrophic in terms of chances at that point. But as you look at final rounds, Booth, you still have places, McCombs, you're going right through this admission cycle. You now have 4 rounds of admission at Insead. So if it's taken the time to get that strong application together, is the last round worth considering?
Me?
Let's start with Kurt.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's worth considering. I mean, from my perspective, is if you look at what are the scenarios that can play out, right? You could get admitted, which is great. You could get potentially waitlisted, where there are still opportunities. And in some cases, right, if you should get denied, right, I think there's a learning as part of that process. Having gone through, at least from our perspective, you're not penalized as a reapplicant. We have plenty of reapplicants who go through a process where they actually learn quite a bit through that process and understand in retrospect, how could I have done things differently? Did I not do enough of my due diligence? And a lot of times they're more successful the second time around. So I think if you're on sort of a timeline where you really want to get your MBA, I think kind of, again, trying to outguess the process and take yourself out of it because you don't think you have a chance, you don't really know, right? And so if you look at those outcomes, right, I think in any case, you're setting yourself up, it's not a terminal event, right? There's opportunities after the fact, so.
And do you feel, Tina, at McCombs that applicants in the later rounds are still as committed and show you the love?
So one of the things, and maybe a way to look at it, is if you have the opportunity to visit the school and that would put you toward a later application, I definitely would find that more valuable, because as you're putting your application together, to be able to visit the school and picture yourself there, you're going to inherently have a stronger application by having that whole story about how, seeing what you can take advantage of, getting to know the culture and the students. And so if you were trying to sort of weigh that decision, I can't visit until this time, which is going to push me to a later submission deadline, that's a good opportunity. We definitely admit students in our 3rd round. It's just the class fills as the rounds come through. So it's just making that consideration.
And one thing also is we see people, when people rush and take Gmat last minute, it's usually really, really the worst thing you can do to your application. So giving yourself a little bit of time, even if that means applying round 3 or round 4, that's fine. Getting an understanding of the spirit of the school is a good advice indeed. But if we were limiting ourselves and not selecting people round 3 or round 4, we could be missing some outstanding profiles. So that we will still have places for those rounds. We want to be convinced. We want to hear about your stories. So even if that means it comes a little bit late in the process. And for us, the rounds are really also here to help you get organized. You have to give notice to your employers. You have to borrow the money, find the finances, move to Singapore, Fontainebleau, tell your family you're going back to school, and by the way, borrow a small amount of money. So for all these reasons, we have these deadlines to help you get organized, basically.
And I know that we prepared some questions, but it's also a certain fluidity with some of the comments. Kurt, you talk about reapplications. There are so many myths out there about the chances of reapplying, but the point you made is that perhaps it'll be more thoughtful. In Insead, it's often, it's a tough school to reapply to when you're already sort of 29 or 30 years old and have a certain sort of background. So do you encourage reapplications? And if so, what are you then encouraging the applicants to share second time around?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, again, if I take a step back, I think it comes really down to where do you really want to be first and foremost? I mean, is it, again, I think reapplicants, in the same way that we look at traditional applicants, it's really what is your identification with Booth? What is it about the institution that really resonates with you? How do you make those connections throughout the process? And again, I think if you didn't get in the first time and you really think that there is a deep connection to the institution, it's absolutely worth going through it. I think what happens is part of the process getting to that reapplication phase is just a deeper sense of self-reflection on the school. I think from an evaluation standpoint, I think there is an expectation if you're going to go through it a second time that we want to see some weight behind why you would do this again. Why did you pass up other opportunities? Why is it you're so committed? And so I think we look for a deeper sense of understanding and connection to the school probably the second time around, but more often than not, I think people do take the time to reflect and make the incremental changes within their application to be successful. So again, I think you really have to ask yourself, first and foremost, why are you doing this again? And that sort of commitment should show in the application process. And a lot of times people are pretty successful the second time through.
Now, Stanford, of course, has the opportunity to apply out of college for seniors, to then join the program straight out, or sort of 2-3 years later?
Some can join straight out, but most will join 1, 2, or 3 years later in our deferred program.
Right. And so perhaps somebody applying that early in their sort of professional development to then consider reapplying 3-4 years later with the experience that they have, that's completely understandable to your admissions team.
Well, I feel strongly with what Kurt said, that even if you're not a college senior and you're applying the next year, we love to see reapplicants because it shows how committed you are to the institution. So I always recommend it'd be great to understand, like you said, there's that additional information essay. Why are you reapplying? Why is this important to you? And the other piece, and I've been studying leadership, I'm getting pretty old now for, I think, 2 decades. I'm kind of a geek. And one of the things that's been proven over and over in the research is that at the end of the day, highly inspirational leaders, those who get the highest performance from their organizations, really know what drives them. And they are thinking beyond themselves to the problems that they can make change and have an impact on. So in our application, one of our key questions is what matters most and why? And it's been an iconic question for a long, long time. So I feel like even if you go through and you don't get in and you want to try that again, taking the time to understand what matters to you, because that will be your true north as a leader, no matter what school you go to, where you go to in the rest of your life. So I think it's a great exercise for anyone to do. And if you don't get in, you want to come back and try again, just let us know why this is so important to you and what's changed since then. But either way, you'll be one step ahead of the game in terms of being able to motivate others.
On a phone call, you can't see the person that you're talking to, but you can hear when they smile. Is it the same thing with the admissions, with the application, where you can tell when they've taken that time for self-reflection and that they've actually enjoyed and embraced this opportunity to think what matters most to them, where business school fits in? Can you tell when they're enjoying it and how that comes across? Tina?
Absolutely. I think the piece of advice that I always give to students that are sort of probably in the phase that you're in thinking about school is there's so much, you attend events like this to find out what we have to say about how to get into business school. And the reality is this is all about you. And the time that you do, the introspection that you do, a wonderful application will fall out of that. And so the important work is now. And so I commend you for being here today. Because the time that you take and the people that you talk to and the research that you do, and you have to do the tough work of self-reflection and figuring out what matters to you, and not what matters to you, what sounds good to get into business school, but what really matters to you and why you want to go to business school. We have read a lot of applications, and yet still every application is a story. And what really works is somebody who knows who they are, knows what they want to do, knows what they don't know. You're coming to business school for a reason, and puts that together in a cogent fashion. We always say an application is part of what we review is your judgment and your judgment about what you put in. And so think about it as that whole picture of you. And that's, if you ask somebody to help you look at it, look at it that way. And what does it say? What do they get back from reading about you? And is that what you intended? But you can absolutely see that sort of personality in an application. Interviews obviously sort of help that. And I know it's hard to sort of put yourself. We do videos. I know many programs do. It's an option because we know that's not everybody's favorite medium, but things like that.
That's such a good answer. We can probably stop the panel and move
Yeah,
into
right
the
there.
song and dance routine. Insead describes itself as the business school for the world, and that sort of international mindset is something that you're looking for. If you live in Switzerland, it might be easy to pursue a career in the surrounding countries, but from a North American perspective, how can somebody sort of demonstrate that sort of global mindset?
Well, global mindset is not necessarily how many days you have spent abroad or if you watch TV from another countries or things like this. It's really, the global mindset comes with your cultural sensitivity and how open-minded you are, and by even staying within your own countries and traveling and meeting people with different backgrounds from your own background and getting challenged by other ways of thinking and challenge yourself is very, very important. So that's not just international or global mindset, it's not just travel. It's also getting to know the others, whether you have tried to learn other languages at school or whether you have decided to go on a path that is slightly different from a traditional path that your family or your social environment had. And all this demonstrate adaptability and flexibility, because at the end of the day, that's what we are getting outside of this. And as the deans put it at Insead, so yes, the tagline is the business school for the world, but basically the idea behind that is seeing business as a force for good, and even more important in those days that we are living at the moment.
So just to touch on a discussion that we had in London, millennials are now applying to business school, and one of the panelists commented, that they're seeing applicants that look at the class profiles, they look at media rankings, and they say, so I have a 737 Gmat score, I have a 3.75 GPA, I speak 3 languages, I match perfectly that class profile that you publish, but you're sort of trapped by that class profile because the people that you're admitting are far more diverse than any of the numbers that are sort of captured there. Kurt, can you sort of speak beyond GMAT averages and GPAs?
Sure. I think for us, first and foremost, I think the thing that we're trying to capture in the application process is a sense of authenticity from students, right? Not trying to outthink or outgame the process. I think in general, we collectively try to be pretty transparent about what we're looking for, how we think about things. I think sometimes there's a distrust that we're not saying, that we're hiding something. In reality is I think we try to be very clear about what's important to us. I think that really it's really a process by which you really have to ask yourself some deep questions about why are you going to go through this process? What do you hope to gain? What is it about these respective institutions that really connect well with you? One of the questions that comes up is, I look very much, or I'm a consultant, right? How do I differentiate myself from other consultants? Or my profile seems very, standard. How do I stand out? And I think the reality is everybody's unique in their own way, and I think if you've all had different life experiences, you all think about things differently. Even as a consultant, you've had exposure to different projects and different people in different parts of the world, and that really sort of shapes a very unique signature around each of you. And I think if you kind of hold true to what is my authentic story, who am I, what are the things that really help me be me, and I know that sounds very sort of ethereal and whatever, but I don't think it's as complicated as I think people make it out to be. And when you have that sense of authenticity and you really think through those elements for yourself, and then you understand maybe how that makes me a good candidate for X school, it's amazing how people really stand out in the process. And those stats, although I'd be lying if I didn't say we looked at that stuff for sure, but those sort of become table stakes, and it's all these other things that sort of come out in the process that help you to stand out and really become distinctive, and it makes my job a lot easier because I can read an application and see who kind of really thought these things through versus somebody who's just filling out the paperwork and submitting the application. So I don't...
Yeah. We're going to keep the panelists wired up after the panel, and if backstage they sort of admit, Kurt's like, so do you think that they bought that answer? Kirsten, you've been studying leadership for 20 years. So here's the sort of the 20-something-year-old applying to business school. How can you sort of, some are working in very hierarchical organizations, others in a very flat Bay Area startup, and how can you sort of identify patterns of leadership?
Yeah, you have me on my soapbox, so I have a very strong point of view.
You only have
this.
10 minutes.
Yeah, so I'll make it brief, but again, it's really for everyone who's in the audience to try to give you as clear an understanding of what we're looking for. And we put it on the web, but sometimes it may not be. I'll give you some examples to make it more concrete for you. At the end of the day, I can speak for Stanford, but I bet some of this is shared. The number one thing we talk about is intellectual vitality. And what does that mean? It means real curiosity. My number one boss, honestly, this is Kirsten Unplugged, are the faculty. That we are a school. There are people who are tenured who will be in this institution. So if I pick you and you're not in the classroom with your hand up, excited, I'm going to hear about it. So exactly. So my job is to make sure that each of you, when I'm looking through your applications, I'm finding evidence of how curious you are, what you've been thinking about, both in your essays but also in your recommendations. Sure, I'll see your transcript and what you studied, but that's not really, are you a person who's gonna be that energizer in the classroom, who's really here to learn? So that's number one, boss. And then the second part for me, and this gets to my soapbox, is our mantra, our mission is change lives, change organizations, change the world. So I have the greatest job ever. I get to go out and try to figure out the 400 or so who I think have potential to change the world. And I have done a lot of research on leadership. And what it really comes down to, we call it demonstrated leadership potential. It's what are your past behaviors? What have you done, whether it was in college, right out of college in your job, that will predict what you're likely to do in the future. That's the data I have to go on. And you have a lot of places that you can show me that. Whether you're in a hierarchical job or you're in a startup, you are in a community and you're having impacts of some kind of scope and scale on others. Maybe you're the one who's always helping your teammate learn and get up to speed. That's leadership. Maybe you're the one who keeps saying, wait, guys, we're going the wrong way. We got to do this. That's leadership. And you can do that no matter how many people report to you or how many people don't report to you. You can also do it in your church. You can do it on your sports team. You can do it on your club volleyball. Your job for me will be show me how you have behaved as a leader. And that defined precisely is the impact that you've had on your community. If you can tell me that, then we're both going to be aligned because that's what I'll be looking for.
I mean, so with 8,000 applicants for 400 places, is the temptation, Stanford talks about changing lives and changing the world. I need to come up with a solution for clean drinking water in sub-Saharan Africa.
Glad you asked that, yeah. Somebody came up to me, I've only been on the job 3 weeks, and they came up and said, Kirsten, I'm not a unicorn. I don't think I'm going to apply. And that was their feeling, like they somehow had to have a big horn, so I was going to notice them in the 8,000. I don't want unicorns. Leadership doesn't come from a socioeconomic status, from, someone said I didn't go to Harvard undergrad, would you ever look at me, from an institution. It doesn't come from the fact you're in private equity. It really comes just from what I told you. And some of my favorite admits truly are those who have the 500 plus Gmat, because every year there will be some, or who came from a community college and then worked really hard to get to a 4-year program. You will come in every shape and size. The only thing you have to tell me is, how have you been this creative learner, this really curious learner, and how have you touched people in your lives? Because if you're doing that, then I want to know about you. That was a soapbox moment, sorry, but I believe it deeply, so thank you for asking.
And of course, if you were courageous enough to sit on the front row and be called out for intellectual curiosity, that improves your chances too. Did you have the time to take notes on that one? Now, in that sort of personal journey, 24-year-olds, 34-year-olds applying to business school, Tina, sense that you can be too young, or can you be too old to apply to business school? For a full-time MBA program.
First of all, nobody is ever too young or too old, just generally. We'll just put that out there since we're all moving on in age, just as a general rule. For business school, we really try to talk about the right time to apply and the right time for you. So figuring out, there are things that we will tell you. For example, work experience will change the way that you approach business school. And so having that orientation is important. There are some people directly out of undergrad who are ready to go to graduate school in business. And it is their job to make the case for why. It's sort of, you're the person making the case for yourself. And if you truly believe that it is the right time for you to go through and that you will have the right outcomes coming out, because part of our job is to make sure we can honor the side of our commitment. What you're coming to do, we want to know that we're the place that you can do that. So, if you come with 20 years of experience and you're expecting to triple your salary coming out and you're, in high tech already making over 100K, that may not happen. You may make a case for why you want to do that. So it's really about the right time for the individual person. And generally, I would say, there's a sweet spot in your development for when an MBA can do the most for you, but it's different for every individual.
So, sorry, we're not going to triple our salary coming out of, well, not straight away. Insead, among many schools that are targets for recruiters like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and in terms of, as you think about people's post-MBA career goals, if you're 33, 34, do we need to be that much more clear about what comes next? Because McKinsey isn't usually looking to recruit the 35-year-olds coming out of business school.
Well, this is very, very important to know what you're looking for after. That's the main reason. And that's also how you will just give your best application. If you have expectations that cannot be met by a business school, then it's very likely that you will not convince the admissions committee. So do your due diligence. Think of it's a match. It's really a match with a business school. So you have to wonder, okay, I have this sort of career path so far. I'd like to go for an MBA, and the MBA will bring me that sort of or career path. You have to have some sort of vision. So yes, indeed, if your career expectations are not realistic, you will not be among the strongest applicants. This is for sure. Knowing the sort of profiles we are looking for, but also knowing the type of profiles that Insead will place, or the type of opportunities we will be able to offer is very important as well. So you may want to look at the employment statistics and where people go after the program, any of these programs, where people are in terms of geographies, in terms of functions, in terms of sectors, because you could be attending one of these programs for a career change, or maybe you want to stay in the same sort of company, or you are set on this sector, but you just want to give a boost to your company, to your career. So it's really by understanding this and having realistic expectations that you will convince us. Yes.
Holding a CentreCourt event in the epicenter of entrepreneurship. There's the startup fever at business school, and perhaps more applicants that talk about wanting to start a business, possibly even starting that business while they're at business school. And Kirsten, I'd love you to come back to that subject of how you support those sort of ideas. Kurt, when you look at individuals that have come from the Fortune 100 company and then talk about starting a business immediately out of school or soon after school, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to us, it's always the quality of the argument that's applied in the application. I'll be candid. 80%, over 80% of our full-time students will shift gears, and most that what they say in their application is not necessarily what they're going to realize when they leave. And again, I think that's part of the beauty of business school. There's a process of discovery. There's a process of understanding. I think, and for a lot of people, like for us, our most popular concentration is entrepreneurship, not necessarily because everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, but I think there's a way of thinking that's applied in that space. There's a way of looking at the world and being, agile in the way you think and how you adapt, which makes it a very practical way to think and learn. So for us, I think from an application standpoint, it's if you really have a passion for a business idea or you want to start a business, again, it's more about the quality of the narrative and how you think you're going to make that happen versus somebody who just throws out, I want to be an entrepreneur because I want to be my own boss, or there's something that's somewhat artificial to that. So we don't necessarily, for me, it's not really about judging what you want to do at the end. It's sort of, how do you think you're going to get there? And what are the things that you can leverage as part of your overall experience, particularly at Booth and the experiences you've had in your life to make that happen? It's more about that. But, again, I think that more often than not, people come in with a general passion. At least that's been a big trend in terms of understanding the entrepreneurial mindset. How you apply that at some point, I think, varies considerably. But
right. And beyond South by Southwest, I mean, Austin, has its own entrepreneurial culture. Is
Yeah.
that something that you're seeing more and more?
You know, when I was director of admissions, one of the things that it was starting probably, 8 years ago, that the preponderance of applicants would say, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to start something. And I was finding that reading applications, it was hard to tell, you're looking for, when you're looking at folks who want to be an entrepreneur, it's, what do you look for? It's easy to say you want to be an entrepreneur, but we know a lot of entrepreneurs, and it is a difficult journey. And so you have to be in it for the long haul. So we look for people who've taken initiative. We actually started 5 years ago a scholarship program where we have students come. We wanted to see entrepreneurs in a different light, so they come and pitch for a scholarship. And you don't have to apply to pitch for the scholarship, so it's open to anyone who wants to be a part of the competition. And students come and they pitch to judges. There's a finalist, and then someone will win a scholarship. They do have to also apply and get into the program as part of that process, but it allowed us to see a different side of students that were looking to get into the entrepreneurship space. And we see a lot of students for similar reasons that have been said, that it's a good orientation, and you can sort of put your courses together. It's a nice integration of the things that you're learning, some of the entrepreneurship classes. So we see a lot of that in the program.
Over 50% of Insead's class, 5 to 10 years out of the program, have started their own company. So are you also looking to understand that longer-term picture and not just immediate goals as they come out of the program?
Yes, that's very true. Not everyone is a serial entrepreneur and willing to do this, but we see that typically the alumni will do it at some point in their career. It's about 60 to 80 students who will do it just right after the program. So for that, we have entrepreneurs in residence, or we have a capstone in entrepreneurship, or we organize venture competition. We've received just 2 major gifts from alumni for the Entrepreneurship Center. So it's definitely an area we focus on, but not just for the sake of focusing on entrepreneurship because it's trendy, but it's also because, as you mentioned earlier, it's agility. Within a huge multinational company, it's very likely that having this entrepreneurial mindset, and we call it intrapreneur, so it's really being within a big company, still having this sort of innovative mindset and agility to adapt to different contexts and environments. So it's not just starting your business, but entrepreneur could be starting a unit in a different company in a different country for a multinational. So there are different ways of going with entrepreneurship.
Media rankings have traditionally rewarded business schools for placing 98% of the class into a position 3 months after graduation. But in US News back in March, I think a third of the Stanford class hadn't decided yet what they were going to do, but they're certainly thinking about it. Is the MBA the right time to start a business?
This is a really complicated question for Stanford, and I love all 3 of your answers, actually, because I think it resonates with me as well. And I did run career services at Harvard before admission, so I know what it's like to be trying to get those surveys and almost want someone to say, yes, I have a job, because there's pressure. But in coming to Stanford, I think one of the reasons I really wanted to take this role is there's something really special about, I shouldn't even say special, I should just say distinctive about the culture and I've been there, working there about 10 years, both in the classroom as well as doing admissions before, and you meet a Stanford student, and I know part of it may happen on intake, but to be honest, people apply to all of our schools at the end of the day, so I think all of you are raw material that might put in applications everywhere. So I think it really does happen culturally when you get to the school where they're surrounded, maybe it's Silicon Valley, but by this idea that I don't have to do 10 things to become a vice president or a CEO. I actually could make a difference today. So it's this mindset that you guys have talked about, and people say it's in the Kool-Aid, but you really will come on campus and hear students talking immediately about, what would I like to be doing in 10 years, but what could I be doing tomorrow to make that happen? So I say it's a love-hate relationship because certainly we have lots of curriculum, we have Startup Garage, we have angel investors on campus all the time. You can start your business, and many do, and many faculty get concerned second year about this issue. So oftentimes students are finding partners to do that. But what we are trying to really inculcate is that sense that, and you called it what did you call it?
Entrepreneurship.
Yes, entrepreneurship. And I think that's what happens, is the deans before said, business school is a transformational experience. And the greatest gift that I think Stanford students get is they come out 2 years later and think, I can change the world. And I might not be doing it tomorrow, and I might not be starting a business alone by myself, but this is going to be a journey where I'm going to make a difference. And I guess where I'd end up is I was talking with an alumni yesterday who's at a private equity firm. He's a founder, what you would think of as a very traditional, non-entrepreneurial job in some ways. They have a fund, and they spend lots of money investing in companies. And I said, what are you most excited about? You know, you've been out for a while now. And he said, we've raised this it's a $2 billion social impact fund because I believe the problem of social investing, to have social impact, everyone's trying it, but unless you throw huge dollars at it, we will never change the world. And the way we'll never create an opportunity for this to really work in our world. So even though he's in a traditional role as a founder, doing very similar things to other companies, he's looking intrapreneurially at what will shift my company and make a difference that's bigger than what we've seen in this industry before. So that if I were sitting in your chairs, I'd be thinking, what do I need to feel like in 2 years from now? I got accounting, I got finance, I have all of that stuff under my belt, but how am I going to transform so when I come out, I'm going to be thinking big like that, no matter what company I go to, whether I start it or not.
Now, we're about 40 minutes into the panel, and we haven't used the four-letter word of GMAT or GRE. And, you know, it's selective. GMAT has even announced this week that you can mix up the order of the sections of the GMAT test, and possibly that'll squeeze an extra 10 points out when you take it for the 5th time. The reality of the importance of GMAT in the process, and are you looking for minimums, or even do you have minimums based on the Indian male software engineer or the individual coming out of an NGO? Kurt, can we start with you on the GMAT?
I'm beginning to think I shouldn't have sat to the left or yeah, no, I mean, I think that the reality is for standardized tests, I mean, the critical component is it allows us to sort of create some ability to compare across markets and industries and backgrounds in a way that just, it gives us some context within a very complex pool. You know, from our perspective, GMAT, GRE, you know, a lot of people, I think it's really sort of a comfort thing. I will say that in general, if people are considering what exams to take, you know, the GMAT was designed specifically to look at, you know, it was designed by business schools to really test certain skills for business schools. So I think, like to Kirsten's point earlier, there's part of the application process that, successful or not, you're going to be practicing and learning some skill sets that will be applicable more readily as part of your business school experience. So sometimes I say, you know, the GMAT is a good trial run for those skills. But again, we'll accept really whatever you want to take. You know, again, and I would just, broadly speaking, it is a holistic process. As I said before, you know, we certainly expect, you know, and again, to Kirsten's point, I mean, like, we have an obligation you know, we want to provide the best possible education, the best possible atmosphere. So, you know, when people apply to Booth, we want to see that they've, you know, done well academically, that they've represented themselves well with testing and whatever, but that's not the end-all, be-all. Again, it comes back to, provided those things are there, what are these other elements that really stand out that help us to understand in a pool where there might be a lot of homogeneity around test scores or GPAs. It's these other things that help to stand out that make us say, well, this person seems like they are inherently going to be more successful at a place like Booth than perhaps this person. So again, in some ways it's there to help us to sort of get some collective understanding across a very complicated applicant pool, but it's a lot of these other elements at the end of the day that help to make the difference in our decision process, if that makes sense.
And I don't want to pin you on this, Kirsten, but if you do take people that have 500 scores but end up with a Gmat average of 737, that suggests that a lot of people are getting 750s and 760s. Your scores keep going up. Where does this end?
I was waiting for one really good question from you, Matt, so I guess that's it. I was going to say, Kurt said it very well, actually. Everything you said, I agreed with. Our score this year will be hovering for the new profile at 740, about flat, and that's hard for me, honestly, because I don't want to send the message that you have to have a 740 in order to apply, but let's face it, we're taking 5%. So if you have time to practice for this test and you really want to go to Stanford, and more importantly, you think you've been one of those people I'm talking about who's had impact in their communities and who is a leader and who wants to make a difference in this world, go take the test again, because it will help. It's one data point. Get a test if you can, if you have the resources. Study by yourself. It is important. And I do. As I said, my favorite candidates are those who have 500s, but I can't. I have a class that, and I feel lucky, honestly, that the rankings for us, and God's honest truth, the new dean who hired me said, this is not something we're stressing about. We're not even stressing about yield. I mean, as an admissions person, it's like, hallelujah. You go out and find the best people you can. So make the case, but boy, if you're that person, make it easy on me. Just go out and study as hard as you can. And take the GRE, take the Gmat, whatever is going to be best for you. I don't care. We're really agnostic. I'd like you to put your best foot forward so I can start and say, all right, here's a score. And if your scores are low and you want to apply lower than our range, so we're saying it has a 5 in front of it, please write some additional information and say, maybe test taking is hard for you. I want to know that too, because I want to look for the best in the application.
Tina, before your parents sent you to that forbidding public school in Scotland, they christened you Christine Candor Mabley, right? Candor is your middle name. I mean, these Gmat scores, based on profiles, there are lots of strategy consultants, there are lots of certain profiles. So are you then that much more demanding from certain profiles with Gmat scores?
A Gmat is a piece of information, and it's as is everything in your application. And so for us, the Gmat was designed to predict how well you would do in the core curriculum of business schools. So it gives a piece of that information. If the score that you have you don't feel represents your ability to do what you believe you can do in business school, then provide some other information in your application that can do that, whether that's courses you've taken, grades you had in undergrad, things you've done to prepare yourself. Maybe take it as an indicator that maybe there's a little work I need to do before business school to get the most out of business school. It's really a piece of your application, and again, that judgment piece of looking at your own application and saying, okay, this may not represent what I believe I'm capable of, and so I'm going to use that extra essay, or I'm going to provide additional evidence that I believe showcases what I'm capable of.
Can I jump in? I loved your answer. Yeah. Right on. Listen to that. And when way back, because I'm very old now, when I was at HBS, we had removed the Gmat. We decided, we don't want this to be some test you're stressing over. We have your transcript. And unfortunately, what happened after that trial period was there were some students who really struggled and were not passing courses. And we went back and were able to say to students, had you applied to other places? And one of the common denominators was a Gmat score that was low. So I love your point. Yeah. In the 500 range, I love your point about this is actually preparation to make sure that you don't get to school and then really struggle because you don't have some of the capability to do it. So it's a great story.
So to use Kirsten's words, that past performance is a predictor of future behavior, perhaps Stanford will get rid of that get rid of the Gmat altogether.
Yes, so I feel a little bit closer to your position towards the Gmat. There are many ways of demonstrating the academic capacity, and transcript of grades is one of them. We do mitigate a lot the scores. And to be very honest, we don't pay too much attention to the total score. We're more looking at the verbal and the quant percentile because of the diversity of the profiles we recruit with 93 different nationalities in the classroom. It's a fact that the average, the mean in some countries is lower than in the US or India or China. So we factor that in. So it's very likely that someone that applies from Kuwait or Qatar will have a lower score, but we will make sure that the academic capacity is there so that the person can benefit from the program without struggling and not graduating at the end. So we have other ways of mitigating this. So for a lower verbal section, for someone who is a foreigner, who doesn't have English as native language, we can use the video, the Kiara video, which we have introduced in the selection process. For somebody who has an engineer background and has math and strong grades in math, we can use that to balance a little bit the quant section.
Now, we have an audience that will take you guys for lunch if it means that they can ask you questions, and I'm going to turn to them in just a second. And perhaps my final question to you is either one piece of advice in the admissions process or even one of those classic mistakes to make sure that you don't make, and whether it's the people that you choose for your recommendations. So your choice, whether it's Tina, the classic mistake or the one piece of advice.
I really gave you my favorite piece of advice because I think so often when I talk to students, it's the piece that's forgotten, and it is to take it back to yourself and think about how you're going to use the programs that we have. What are you going to do with those 2 years? You're making a big decision financially, from a time perspective, to take 2 years out of your professional career to do something. And what are you going to do with that? And when you make that plan, one, it's a great primer for your leadership development plans for the rest of your life. Two, it will tell you what questions to ask, what things to be aware of. Since I already gave that speech in an earlier question, I think that the most important thing I think you can do now is you will be amazed at who will answer your call if you email somebody, ask for 15 to 20 minutes of your time. That's what I find is the consumable portion that people are willing to give up willingly, and say, I'm thinking about going to business school, I'm thinking about getting my MBA, and I'd love to hear about your insights in your profession or what you do. You will be amazed. I tell my students this the first day of school when they come to campus, to use those 2 years. That's your sort of license to play. You're in positions now where you might not be able to call up your competitor and say, hey, how do you do what you do? I'm interested in what you're doing. But as an applicant to an MBA program, you can do that. And that work that you do will help you refine how you're going to use those 2 years. And a wonderful application will fall out of that process.
And Tina has promised to spend 15 to 20 minutes to talk with each and every one of you between now and Tuesday morning.
If it means staying in San Francisco, I'm happy to do it.
Kirsten, you have the best job in the world for you.
For me.
So what would your advice be?
I actually think I loved what Tina said before about having a cogent application, and the advice, you could just sit here and do mine. You can do both of our jobs. But at your fingertips, what I've noticed, and I've done this now like 20 years, if I look back to when I started doing this at Harvard, there are all levels of applications in terms of how much preparation, how much time, how thoughtful and cogent the argument is. And the ones that are going to rise to the top are the ones who have taken that time. You can't control what I'm going to do with your application. I'm going to read it and the committee that I work with in a very different way than any of these schools. You have some little insights into it, but what you can control is the story that you want to tell each of us. So I love that Tina talked about get on the phone, figure out from people in your profession what you want to do. Talk to alumni. We're traveling all around the world and we're bringing them. We have a question, why Stanford? I'm sure you guys have similar. How many people write, I hate to say it, but that question, many people seem like, I want to be this and I want to be in California. It's at a very surface level. You have control right now to do some research to figure out what your goals are and how will Stanford or Booth or any of our schools specifically fit with that. What are the classes? Who are the faculty? What's the club? What's an alumni that's done something interesting to you? Put it into that essay so that I know you really care and you really want to come to my school. And that's some of the best advice I could give you, is to take that time to connect the dots between what you value, how Stanford will help, and what your dreams are, that whole piece. And the only way you're going to do that is to get out there and research and not just sit down one night and crank it out and hit submit.
Yeah.
So applying to Insead with the response, why Stanford, presumably is one of those classic mistakes. It does happen, right?
Right, it does happen.
Yes,
yeah.
the copy-paste, we see that. Please avoid the copy-paste. I'm applying to LBS because, no, come on, read your essays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would your advice be?
Yeah, my advice would be, you would not believe, sometimes we hear people's story when we meet prospects, and I'm looking forward to meeting you this afternoon, but most of you have very, very interesting stories, and you tell those stories, you count these stories, and then when you read the essays, it's plain, it's dry. Where is the true yourself? Where is the true person behind these essays? Make them true, genuine, honest. We read, as you said, we read thousands of essays, so just talk about you, and that will be an interesting essay. So be yourself is my best advice.
And Kurt, I'm a slow learner, but I did pick up that I should be asking some of the questions last too. But they've already said everything, right?
Well, I was just gonna say, man, you're getting me on both ends of this thing. Yeah, I would just say, I mean, ditto, but I think the one thing I would say that's often overlooked is that just the application itself is not, from an admissions perspective, it's not an arbitrary process. Like, we don't just throw stuff into an application with no thought and just say, here it is, fill it out. I think every school does ask different essay questions for a reason. They think about their recommendations differently for a reason. And in some ways, it's important for you guys to think about, there's fixed real estate for you to be able to sort of tell these authentic stories, to share who you are. And that takes some time, and it takes a level of strategic thinking that I think is often missed. And people just go through and they fill out the materials and they give the recommendation form. And oftentimes, because they do that, there are redundancies that naturally come up. You lose space because you said the same thing multiple times in multiple facets. You forget that the resume itself tells a story, right? And so I think you have to be smart about the exercise itself is an exercise in how you strategically think, and oftentimes that's missed. So if you don't, it's one thing to know your story and what it is you want to convey. It's another thing to be able to do it effectively in the applications that you're filling out. And there are differences, and I think recognizing and trying to understand how you're going to leverage that full real estate is a critical exercise that oftentimes goes overlooked. So,
Can I add a quick, as you put the application together, all of the pieces should tell the same story or tell pieces of the same story, because that's a big mistake we see people make is your recommender will say, so-and-so really wants to go into packaged goods marketing. And then in your essay you say, it's usually not investment banking or something radical like difference like that, but they don't say the same thing, or maybe somebody changes their mind and by the time they interview, they're saying something very different from their resume. And so if your application doesn't hang together and tell the same story or contribute to that story, that can become a problem.
Now, the fog is going to roll in about an hour from now, and the best way to spend a Saturday afternoon is with 34 of the world's top 40 business schools in the galvanized room, and I think I tried to share where that was from 1:30 onwards. So lots of chance to talk to the schools and ask your questions. But as we wrap up this panel, let's just take a couple of quick questions from the audience. Front row. It works, the front row, doesn't it?
So I'm just curious, because most of the schools will require a work resume. And the work resume usually does not show as much of the leadership as...
Thank you. Especially when it comes to specific roles. On the work resume, we will put a lot of very technical things on there. Would you suggest rewrite the whole work resume for the application itself, or would you suggest just simply use what we use for job applications?
Right, so lots of JavaScript and Python on the resume, but how does that come across to business school? Should we be adapting those resumes for the admissions office?
Go ahead.
Nobody has the answer to your question, so let's...
I'm happy. You know, there's several places, and I don't know how everyone else's application works, but on ours, I think a good resume will sing exactly what you've done, both intellectually and as a leader, but it doesn't tell you the how. And the how is an important thing, because for us, I talked about your behavior will predict, how you impact will predict. So have a great resume for work, and you can submit that. But in the application, we give you descriptions of what you've done. So you can give me a little bit more of the how in there. And then also, and if you're thoughtful, and I'm going to emphasize thoughtful here because it's tricky, your recommenders, at least in ours, are asked, how has this person been differentiated in their work versus others at a similar level or position? So that's a wonderful opportunity for your recommender to really talk about, let's say you're this generic consultant, you're a McKinsey consultant, whatever it is, how have you approached your assignments and your clients different than others who have come before you? The reason I say you need to be careful about that is you can certainly sit with a recommender and talk about how important that piece is and what you'd love for them, the lens you might like for them to think about as they write it, instead of just saying they're top 20% and, just give the facts like you have on your resume. But please make sure that you're not giving your recommenders, ideas for answers for these, because there's the saddest thing for me, I think, literally the saddest, is when I'll get an applicant who looks phenomenal, their story's awesome, and I'll get to their recommendations, and there will be cut and paste of the same paragraph, because the recommender was thankful for what you gave them and was cutting a corner, but then it brings up all kinds of questions about your integrity and others, because how do I really know, what happened there? So have conversations with your recommenders about that's an important piece of the puzzle and what they might like to share, but do not give them potential answers they might want to give the admissions committee.
Two answers with that one. I'm just going to look beyond the front row briefly. Yes?
Sure. So I guess in an effective or authentic application, part of that would include exuding some self-confidence, but also some self-awareness. How would you give advice on showing that balance there?
That's a great question. Who would like to start with self-awareness? Virginie?
That was the reason for us adding the video, because indeed on paper that's very difficult to show your self-awareness and how you communicate and the drive and the energy, and through the video we could get that. And also in the interviews, I don't know, you probably get these. So interviews with alumni, you have that comes across, because indeed on paper that's kind of difficult to be able to show that, but that's probably not exactly where you want to put it. It's probably more coming out of the interviews, coming out of the letters of recommendation that we can understand this self-awareness.
I would say, the interview is a big place for that, and some people really view the interview as a performance and forget to stop and breathe and be in a conversation with the person. Many of us use alumni in our interviewing, and that's a great opportunity for you to learn about the school as part of that conversation. And so I think some of that authenticity can be sort of confirmed in the interview. You'll see it in the things in the application.
Can just talk about also that sort of sense of confidence without attitude, or sense of humility, but also making sure that you speak up for yourself, right? So, some applicants, we talk about many sort of women applicants to business school that, really don't sort of put forward all of the things that they've achieved. So, we want a degree of confidence too, right, Kurt?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I think there's an expectation you're applying to business school, right? And so there's a sense just within that exercise alone, right? There's a confidence that goes just going through the application process and sort of assessing what is it that I want to do. I don't think that these things are mutually exclusive, right? I mean, self-awareness is a lot about when do I advocate and speak up in a way that shows that, I'm making contributions to my organization, I'm impacting people. It shouldn't be associated with being self-confident necessarily translates into arrogance, right? And part of that balance of self-awareness is really understanding, when am I appropriately telling the story in the correct way and using I and my contributions versus the we. There is no, again, it's always, I think everyone looks for the formulaic sort of answer, and there isn't one. And that's where, again, this trickiness of being authentic, right? If you don't have self-awareness, you can't fake it in an application process, right? If you are naturally very high on self-confidence to the point where you're very cocky and arrogant, right? That's going to come through in some ways. There's so many facets of an application. There's so much complexity to it that I think a lot of people underestimate. That authenticity naturally comes through, right? Because with interviews, essays, whatever else. So I think you just got to find the balance for yourself. And again, don't try to outgame the system. Just communicate what it is that is specific to you.
Now I figure that the front row can rush the stage, and you'll be the first one to be able to answer your question personally. We have lunch for these guys.
How nice of you.
Was that humble enough?
Yeah.
But I just wanted to thank all four of you for the time, for the candor, and for the insights. And I know that everyone will have the chance to speak with you later on this afternoon. This has been recorded, and I think it's on the Poets and Quants Facebook Live. So we go back to Tina's first comment where you just push a button and submit. But thanks to all four of you for this panel together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt.
Thank you.